co-president with Mitch at MAG. This program, of course, is Jumpstart Your Art, which was started 3 years ago, and it's been a very successful endeavor for MAG. Today, we're, of course, talking about preparing your portfolio for exhibition, and I'm sure that Patricia has a lot of good advice in terms of how to make yourself stand out from the pack when you're doing this. So that's it. Go ahead, Patricia. Continue.
Great. Okay, so I am recording, just so you know.
Okay.
Mary, you have a question?
Yes, please. Just so I know how much to worry about notes, are you giving any sort of a handout, Patricia, or should we just take our own?
Do you want to record? You're recording this, right?
I'm recording it, and I will, I don't have notes now, but what I'm going to do is after the meeting, I'm going to put together some documents and
Okay.
I will share them with you. I
Great.
mean, I always think it's good to take notes because it helps you remember, but you don't have to obsessively write every single thing down. I can also give a PDF of the PowerPoint or the keynote or whatever it is, if that's helpful to you also.
That would be terrific. I would love that.
Usually I create, and Mitchell knows this, usually I'm all about the Google folders. Usually I'll create a Google folder that I put stuff in. So there might be a resource page and some information there. I probably am going to also include some stuff that we may not cover here, but will be helpful to you. And so you'll get a folder. So we are recording. If you're uncomfortable being on camera, then, do feel free to put your camera off, but I do love to see faces. And I'm going to ask everyone to mute while I'm doing the presentation. Hey, Jackie. I see Jackie, Paul, I see a bunch of people I know. Nice to see you all. So just keep yourself on mute, just because, as you all know, it minimizes the kind of disturbances of, sounds kind of popping people in and out of the image. And the chat is a great way to kind of, communicate and put stuff in. I will try and monitor the chat as much as possible. If there's questions, I really would like this to be more discussion, to be a more discursive thing than just me talking at you. So I have a bunch of stuff to cover, but at any point, just, just type something into the chat. If I don't see it, because sometimes when you're presenting, you miss things. There's a little hand you can do in the reactions thing, you can raise your hand. And maybe, Barbara or Mitchell or whatever can say, oh, so-and-so has a question and you missed them. Also, when there's a presentation, I'll only see a couple of you, so I might not see you. Okay, so those are just some, the Zoom protocols that we're probably all very familiar with by now. So I'm going to jump right in. And so this is my contact information. I hope you will get in touch. I'm the founder of the Crit Lab, which I work particularly with artists on really pushing their work, pushing the sort of vision and voice of their work. It's a pretty rigorous program, and Mitchell can tell you about that, as well as being an artist myself and running a project space and all of that. So, find me on Instagram, get in touch. And happy to also have if you have follow-up questions or whatever, please feel free to email me. Just know that if you don't hear back from me right away, sometimes my email goes to just the spam thing has been a problem lately. So, don't feel free to kind of bug me a little. I'd rather you bug me than think that I'm ignoring you. So sometimes the email is a little bit challenging to kind of keep up all of that. So all right, so this is the description that was listed for the program for today, some of the things that we're going to cover. I am happy to kind of pivot, right? You guys are all artists. You kind of have a sense of what you're interested in. I'm happy to go a little deeper in something or move quickly through something or what have you, according to what interests you. But let's jump in. I have a lot of stuff there's probably more stuff here than we're going to cover. If it seems like it's an opportunity to go deeper into something, then we will, but otherwise we'll just move along. So I always like to set the parameters of, what are terms that we're dealing with, right? probably most of you are familiar with this, but I'm a stickler for language. And I think it's really important to kind of be clear about the types of things that we're talking about, because portfolios today will refer to a kind of family, a whole family of things, right? It's not going to be specifically only one type of portfolio opportunity, right? So the different kinds of exhibition, these are the kinds of things we're going to cover, right? What are people looking for? Curating images, some of the tips and work samples. We probably won't get into understanding digital files and all of that. I'm going to touch on it, but I can go into it a little bit more deeply. It's really important. And even when we think we understand it, it's relatively confusing. So if you feel like that's something you'd like to cover, also I can do that. So again, terms are important. Let me just move you guys out of my way. Whoops. Uh-oh. Oh, it's this keynote thing. A couple of different kinds of common, there's obviously a myriad of ways that work gets exhibited, but a couple of common ways that we encounter exhibitions are curated and juried exhibitions. Sometimes these get a bit conflated, but there is a distinct difference between them, while again, sometimes they get a little bit combined. So a curated exhibition is when you have a curator, they may be the gallery director, they may be an outside curator for an organ that is hired by an organization, or there may be, an in-house curator who is called upon to prepare works for an exhibition that is thematic. It can be a monograph exhibition, which is a solo exhibition, but still that's thematic, right? And basically that means that they seek out the artists. They don't start with artists who send stuff in, they seek out artists. So they might seek them out through exhibitions that they've seen, through okay, are you getting feedback here? Exhibitions that they've seen, through artists that they've known. They might find artists through other artists. That's a very common way that people find artists. In fact, artists are often the greatest resources for other artists. So I'm a big, huge advocate of artists supporting one another, because we are a community and artists get exhibition opportunities and all kinds of opportunities through other artists. A juried show is distinct in the sense that the juror does not start out with their own roster of artists. I think can everyone just make sure you're muted? I think I'm getting a little feedback here. I don't know if you're hearing that, but
He's not muted.
Yeah, there's feedback from somebody's machine, or somebody's talking in the background.
so everybody just make sure you're muted. Sometimes we forget, and then also we always forget to unmute ourselves when we're going to talk. So a juror is usually someone who they may be a curator. They are hired to work with a submission-based project. So in other words, an open call is sent out, a prospectus, and artists submit work. Usually there is a cost, and the juror picks work from that group of submissions. So this means that the juror is not going out and finding their own artists. They are only choosing from the submissions that are sent. So if you know me, you already know that I really counsel artists to be very strategic about juried shows. In the clearest sense, it's a little bit of a problematic system, in that when you pay to enter an exhibition, essentially the exhibition is paid for by artists who don't get into the show, as well as artists who do. So I find that a little problematic, but it is one of the systems that we have. I'm not against juried shows. I just want artists to be strategic about which shows they enter, when they do, and to take all these things into consideration. So for example, MAG is an awesome art organization, very supportive of community. It's a wonderful membership group, right? In that case, I would be delighted to enter a juried show. I'm part of that community, et cetera, right? You're not going to necessarily enter a juried show for, the Tennessee Art Association unless you are from there, right? So I think that with juried shows, it's a question of what is practical, pragmatic for you as an artist, right? Because they can be costly to enter, and you pay for the entry whether you're accepted or not. You pay for all your expenses, shipping, et cetera, et cetera. The venues may or may not have insurance. And so I think, so I'm a big, huge advocate of regional art centers. I'm going to be curating a show for the 2 Hudson Valley Arts Association art organizations coming this spring. I'll be the juror. So clearly I'm not against that. I just think that one should be strategic. So if it's an organization that you feel supports artists and is, going to be, it creates community and is meaningful to you, then for some reason, oh, there we go. Okay. sorry, I'm just gonna make this visible to me. So I think that, so figuring out what places, let's see if I can do this. Sorry, guys, I have this new computer and it uses Keynote and it never lets you see your cursor. Gotta go back here. So when you're looking at what makes sense for you to enter, so again, regional art centers, awesome. Part of your community, an organization that you support, that you're a part of and all of that, I'm a big fan. If there's a museum, small museums often have juried shows, you know, they're gonna do something for the artist. It's, you know, it gives you prestige of the organization and also the title of the juror. If the juror is someone that you would like to get your work in front of, remember that people in the arts are out there looking at work all over in different contexts and everything like that. So it's, even if you don't get in, it doesn't mean that, you know, that also can be good because, you know, you're getting your work in front of these eyes, right? So I think that for nonprofits, I'm much more sort of supportive of doing that for nonprofits. Like, for example, the Painting Center in New York they have membership and they also do juried shows. But they're in New York, they do a lot for their artists. They create a catalog. It's a real community. So in that case, right, that makes sense. So it's just you know, we have to be smart about these things, right? Don't enter every show that comes up simply because it's an opportunity. I will tell you that curators, if they see only juried shows on a resume or a CV, that will sometimes give them pause, right? Okay, so again, these are the kinds of organizations that you'll see. Nonprofits are 501c3, quote unquote charity, although I think that's kind of a misnomer. So everything from Mamaroneck Artists Guild is a nonprofit organization to the Metropolitan Museum, right? So the range of the kinds of nonprofit organizations is really wide. And I do think that if you are paying for a jury situation, and it's a commercial gallery, I might have more questions, right? Because the gallery might be taking 50% of the sale price. You know, there's not as much incentive if they are making all of their operating expenses from jurying, et cetera, et cetera. So just be kind of smart about where you're placing your money, right? I have a friend who says she puts aside this amount of money every year for juried things. And when she spent that money, she doesn't do anymore, right? So she has to be really strategic about which ones she's going to do. And alternate spaces, I think I am a huge fan of artist run culture, artists creating opportunities for themselves, for one another. And this can be, again, I've known artists who've cleared out their living room and invited everyone they know and been very successful, open studios, et cetera, et cetera. These are all good options. Now, this works in different ways depending on the situation. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of how these things might work, right? So if there's one juror or curator, then in a juried show or a curated show, in general, the juror or the curator is a known person, right? Their bio is there, you know who they are. So if you get a prospectus, you know so-and-so and their title and you know about them, this is the person who's jurying this show. The curator, you will be visible, although again, the curator is not generally functioning by open call. Today's world, there's exceptions to every single thing I'm saying, right? These are the conventions. And then there are kind of, if you understand the conventions, then you understand the exceptions. When you're working with a panel situation, so grants, residencies, other institutional opportunities, fellowships, and sometimes exhibitions in kind of like places like the Q Foundation, sort of museum type spaces or nonprofit type spaces who have an open call, not a juried call, but an open call. So, which is a little bit different than a juried show, right? So like an open call for a solo exhibition, for example, Q Foundation has one. You can look at theirs and look at the specs. You'll get a sense of what that kind of thing will look like. So what it means with these, how that will work is there'll be a panel of people who will look at the work, not one person, it'll be a group. How many people will completely range depending on the institution. If it's a small organization and they're going to get a reasonable number of applications, there might be 3 panelists and there might be up to somewhere like 8. It's not going to be 20 because that's too many people, right? Except for something like, blanking on the name of it. There's one that's done kind of they send out all of them to like hundreds of, it's almost like a crowdsourcing version. That's a little bit of an exception. For the most part, these panels are going to be relatively small, between 3 and 8 people. What will happen is the groups of proposals will be split up. This is true. This will be true of grant panels, residencies, all of that, any kind of thing like that. The administrators of the organization will not be choosing the work. The administrators never choose the work. What they do is they administer the panel. They administer all of the works to the panelists, and they have to be neutral because they work for the organization. They're not allowed to kind of choose the work. And so it'll generally happen in a couple of rounds, again, depending on how many there are. So if there's like 400 plus, they're not going to sit in one fell swoop and look at all of that work. What they will do is they will divide those, they'll divide the applications up into smaller groups of 30 to 40, right? And they'll give each person maybe 30 or 40 applications to review. In that review, that will be review that is done individually, privately in that person's home, right? On their own computer. And there'll be a rating system. So maybe it's 1 to 5, and they'll have a list of criteria. So it's not just one criteria, like this person is a 4 and this person is 5. It's more, there's a whole range of, so there'll be like uniqueness of the proposal, professionalism of the work, your originality, media, there'll be a whole list of criteria that is dependent on the institution. And the panelists will rate each of those between 1 to 5, they'll tally them up. Then all of the 5s will be collected, all of the 4s, et cetera, depending on how many 5s and 4s, they might also collect the 3s. It doesn't mean they throw the rest out, but it does mean that the 2s and 1s may never get looked at again, unless, there's some reason why they move down the chain. Does happen, right? And then the second round, which will be the final round, pre-COVID would have been in person, where all of the panelists would be together in a room and they would review all of the 5s and the 4s, et cetera, and they would begin to winnow that down. So that is generally how it happens. I'm sure now they're mostly, happening obviously on Zoom. Now, every year, those panels will be different. So if you applied for a grant or a fellowship or a residency and you did not get it, you were not awarded that, then when you apply again the next year, you're going to have your work in front of an entirely new set of people. So that's great because maybe the people last year, had different agendas or were interested in different work. Maybe the people who applied were really different, right? Maybe one year you have like all of your, one of the grant things I have, it says you have to make a proposal like you're going on after the Beatles, like you don't know who else is in the pool, right? And these things shift. And also some people, it's always really close. What's really kind of thrilling when you participate in these, and I've participated in several grant panels and residency panels, is that, there's usually a healthy, robust discussion when you get down to those top things. It's really hard to pick one. You feel, these panelists are people in the arts. They are very sympathetic. And so they'll be very sympathetic. And the things that can happen is that people remember, like this is, the art worlds, there's not one art world, but the art worlds are pretty small. People get to know other people's work. And if you've been applying to things, regardless of whether you've been awarded or not, people recognize the work and they begin to see it. And they might've been, that work last time some other time I was on another panel and really loved that work and it just didn't make it to that round. I really want to support it this time. So there's all kinds of things that happen behind the scenes, but know that everybody is there. It can be really, I know this firsthand, it can be, the rejections are painful, right? There's no getting around it. And I have this quote somewhere in this presentation, but Sharon Loudon always says, it's not a rejection, it's a difference of opinion. But it still can, can sting, right? But remember that people are there with the best interests at heart, right? They really want to know what you're doing. They want to look at the work. They are predisposed to be interested, right? So your job as the artist is to not make it hard for them, right? Not make them work too hard, not make it difficult to understand or to see, and to kind of put your work forward in the best quality, like in the best light, right? And to know that some people will not know your work at all. Maybe they won't even know the genre. Maybe that panelist comes from, you know, a public art background or a dance background. I mean, they tend to try and make them somewhat media specific, but they also want a range of opinions, right? And so remember, they may or may not know what the work is all about. So what are they looking for? The most important thing is the quality of the documentation. And Jackie has a question, is it better to look at titles or themes of shows? You mean then jurors or panelists or curators, sorry. I think that I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I think you look at the whole picture. You weigh the cost benefit, right? Do a little cost benefit analysis, because sometimes now, you know, it might be $50 for 3 images, right? I'm going to look twice as hard at something that costs that much than I am that something costs $15, right? I mean, really want to weigh all of the things. So you have the venue itself, what kind of venue it is, what kind of, you know, who's going to see the work there? What kind of venue is it? Do they support artists? Are they a good faith organization that really cares about the artist? What is the cost? Who is the juror? What kind of work do you find that they are interested in? What kind of, what is the theme? Is my work inside the theme? All of that kind of stuff. So when you're putting together a group of works, this is going to vary a lot. The other thing about juried shows, so what I'm talking about here is portfolios, right? I'm not talking about when you're submitting 1 or 2 works. I'm talking about, some of this will apply, obviously, but I'm really talking about how does one put forth one's work to kind of, you know, promote yourself as an artist, not as a person who made an individual object, right? We're talking about the cohesive artistic vision. So what people are looking at is the cohesive artistic vision. This doesn't mean that everything looks the same, right? What it means is that when they see the work, a group of works, it's recognizably by the same artist. So if you all know artists who you love, who are, you know, well-known artists or canonic artists who've worked in different media, for example, and yet the work is recognizable. It doesn't mean it's different. It doesn't look exactly the same, but there's something about that work that you know is theirs, right? That is the cohesive vision that is yours. The work should feel like you made it and it doesn't look like a lot of other things. And one of the ways that happens obviously is, you know, making the great work that you make and also putting together groupings that kind of tell that story. Now, obviously, if you're submitting 3 images or 15 images, what that means is quite different, right? Most of the time, you know, in today's world, the submission requirements are relatively small. So when you're applying for residencies and grants and stuff like that, they're going to want between 5 and 8 images, which is a very small amount, right? That's got to be very tightly curated. When you have 15 to 20, then you have more space to kind of, you know, stretch out and maybe show more work, more diverse work. But again, you don't want it to look like a mishigash, right? So think of each group of images. This is really important. Think of each group of images as a solo exhibition. So when you go to an exhibition, they don't randomly put work up. They don't kind of put stuff up in, I think I have this in the next slide. They put together work so that it builds upon itself. It's almost like you're making a case for the work, right? This is the most important thing. You have to think of every single image as like an Upper East Side Madison Avenue townhouse, right? If something calls for 15 to 20 images and you don't have 20 images that are equally powerfully strong, then put in 15, right? That's that Madison Avenue townhouse. You can't waste an image. You can't waste an image. It's like, it's too valuable. And so you don't want to have filler images. I don't mean because the work, maybe you don't have like a grouping that's strong enough, all of the same, or maybe the pictures aren't all equally good, then don't put the 20, do the 15. Less is more. Someone,
did I send you the thing about the? Did I send you the thing about the?
I'm gonna mute this. Okay, so this is really important. It doesn't mean that everything has to be the same, you know, all painting or all sculpture, but it does mean it needs to look like the work all goes together. So think of it as an exhibition. And that is not only in the grouping, but in the order. Curating is about, curating in a portfolio is the order of the, is obviously which images you pick, but the order of the images, okay? Super, super, super important. So artists tend to curate chronologically or emotionally. Neither of these is a good strategy for, you know, showing your work to people who don't know you, right? Who don't know the work. Sometimes people want to show off, right? Like they want to show that, oh, look at what a good artist I am. I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. That's not what people are interested in. They're not interested in your skill. They're not interested in your chronology or the range of works that you do. What they're interested in is a cohesive vision. And so every image counts. And I will say that very often, I mean, very often you're only giving between 4 and 8 images, but the first 4 images are incredibly crucial. This doesn't mean that you have 4 strong images and the rest of them are weak. No, it does not mean that. But what it does mean is that you want to come out of the gate making an impression. When someone has to look at 40 or 50, just remember, put yourself in the panelist's position, right? Always put yourself in the position of the person who's receiving the information, because you want to make it easy for them, accessible, comprehensible, like easy to find stuff, very clear. And so if someone's going to look at 50 applications, they're going to look at all of it. They're being paid to do it. But those first 4 images, they may be like, wow, okay, what's going on here? I'm really interested, right? So some of the things to ask: do the work samples demonstrate a coherent current artistic vision? Does it relate to the theme? And when I say does it relate to the theme, I don't, you know, I think that sometimes juried shows pick these themes like red or water or something like that. And artists sometimes feel like that they take that quite literally. And it's not that you shouldn't take it literally. They do mean that that's the theme. However, you can also take it quite poetically. I'm not a big fan of making work specifically for a juried show because you may not get in. So if it's an inspiration to get you to do something that you're interested in doing anyway, and will feed your work regardless of whether you get accepted to this exhibition, then by all means. But making work specifically for that kind of situation, I think, I don't know, I don't find that to be as helpful, right, for me in the terms of my studio practice. So when you think of the theme, think kind of a little bit more conceptually. And so does your work, does your statement match the work? So I've been in situations where I'm on a panel and I look at the work and I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. What's going on here? And then I read the statement and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand how these two relate to one another. And this happens a lot. I do a lot of consulting with artists on their artist statements. And because I know it's so hard. It's so hard for artists. It's so hard for all of us, myself included. Two hardest things are curating, well, making the work, its own kind of thing. But in terms of the professional side is writing really good statements and then curating the work. It's really, really hard. So the statement, remember that your statement is about the work. It's not about you, it's about the work. Very often I will I've been on panels where I'm reading the statements and I'm like, this has nothing to do with the work. Or you have a general statement, it doesn't have to do with the images. So the statement's job is to inform me about things that are not clear from what I'm looking at. In other words, to inform me about what I'm looking at, to make me better understand what I'm looking at. That means something different for every artist, and it's kind of a different workshop, but it's super important. Make sure your statement relates to the images that you present. So you really, I mean, these days, people are wanting work from the last 2 years, 5 years max, unless you are, you know, you're an artist. Some people work on very large projects that take years to come to fruition, like public projects or something like that. Of course, that's an exception. Maybe you took time off to, you know, care for a family member or something like that, and you don't have current work. That might mean 2 things. It might mean that you need to wait until you have a good, solid, you know, whatever the number of images are to apply to some of these things. Or it might mean that verbiage goes into your text. Now, the verbiage should not go into the text unless it relates directly to the work. In other words, we don't want a backstory of the work unless that backstory relates to the work. So if you are a landscape painter and your work is about light and seasonal change and, you know, beautiful things like that, then talking about the personal narrative is probably not going to make sense, right? I'm going to read that. I'm going to see the images and be like, I don't understand how these things compute. So remember, the text is there to give me information, to inform me about what I'm looking at. Okay. And right, again, this is going to depend. If you're doing a grant, if you're applying for a grant or a residency or, you know, something like that, then very often you have to have a longer statement or a proposal of some kind. So this, you know, I'm giving you sort of the total context for this. Whereas in a juried show, you're generally submitting images and maybe a short statement. But even then, the statement should always apply to the work. It's a good idea to share your samples. And I don't mean just share your samples, but share your curated samples with someone who maybe isn't an artist, maybe someone who doesn't know the work. You know, just to be helpful to like, is this reading? You want to think of the curation as a kind of a narration, right? It's a visual narrative. So when you go through the images, does it seem like it's jumping around too much? Does it seem like, you know, you went from this to that? Like very often there's narrative breaks. There's something like you have, 4 images that seem to make a lot of sense. And then all of a sudden it leaps to something else. So you have to think about how you're going to organize the images in such a way that you are building a case for the work, that I get more and more interested as I look. I'm interested at the get-go and I'm like, oh, really? Oh, nice. Oh, right. And I don't go, oh, very interesting. Wait, what? Where did that come from? You know what I mean? That kind of stuff happens a lot. It's very hard to curate our own work, but these are the kinds of ways to think about it. And so having someone else look and say, well, does anything kind of leap out? Like, you know, you have 3 images that are really cohesive and then all of a sudden it leaps to something else. You do need to have different works often, right? So it doesn't mean you have to have all my red paintings and, you know, only can do a proposal with that and only a proposal. That's not what it means, but it might mean you rearrange those images differently according to what's in it. I rearrange my images according to the sort of what the ask is, like what is the theme or what is the proposal, like what am I writing about? Is it a proposal? Then I want those images to back that up, or I want that to back up the images. And if it's sort of more general, then I want it to read as like giving you this kind of cohesive sense of my overall practice, right? My overall practice. And that's why you think of it as an exhibition. Even in a museum, when you go from room to room, they have very thoughtfully considered how those transitions happen. So think of it as a transition, right? Between rooms. So this is the most important thing, right? Again, I think I've already said this, but good quality pictures are incredibly important and also difficult, right? I always say that, you know, the great thing about digital photography is that everybody can take a picture. The terrible thing about digital photography is that everybody can take a picture, right? This means that we assume that like the snapshot we took with our iPhone, because it's like has a lot of pixels and we threw it on Instagram and everybody loved it, is good enough picture for documentation. It does not mean that. Now, that doesn't mean that one can't take okay documentation with a phone, especially like the newest phones, the ones that like have just come out, you know, in the last year or so. Those cameras are they're probably better than, you know, 90% of the digital cameras that we all bought a few years ago, right, to take pictures of our work. Unless you're talking about a very professional SLR, you know, $5,000, $5,000 to $10,000 camera. But that doesn't, just because something has lots of pixels does not mean it's a good picture, right? So understand how to present your work in the best light. So the way that I've been framing this in today's world is a little bit different than I might have been before. Now, the digital age is not new. We've been here a while. However, the pandemic did push us a few years into the future in the way that we interface with the digital space as artists. In the past, we thought very much of pictures of our work as pictures of our work. I want to encourage you to think a little bit differently about your photographs of your work, your documentation of your work. I want you to think of them as access points to the real. We are object makers, and the digital space is a digital picture is a kind of object. So let's get like that out of our heads, that this is some weird thing and all of that. Understand that we are going to be functioning in the digital space. And if you think of it as a digital space and as an object space, one can make a translation in that digital space to communicate something about your work. And so that means that the kinds of pictures you might take might shift a little bit. Now, I talk about that as a translation loss. So every kind of work, every time you translate like a you know, a material object to a digital object, there is a translation loss, right? There's a difference. There's nothing like being in front of a work in person. I am not going to try and persuade you otherwise, because I feel the same way that I'm sure you all do, that when I stand in front of a painting, it is not the same as being in front of a digital image. However, if we understand that 99% of people are going to encounter our work digitally, then it is our job as artists. It's not the digital job. It's the job of us as artists to make that image communicate what we want it to communicate, right? As clearly as possible. So if you think of the picture as not like a picture of my work, but an access point to the real. In other words, how am I getting this person who's looking at this image, how am I giving them a way to understand what this object looks like in real life? I'm going to give you some tips. So the way that I think of translation loss is that some images, the translation loss is small. So if you work is, and I'm going to show you some fabulous Crit Lab artists. If your work is, this is a painting, it's very like saturated color, large shapes, some flat colors, very graphic, dynamic, and all of that. Now, by no means is that looking at this here a substitute for seeing this painting in person. I can tell you that because I've seen this painting in person, right? And there's a texture, there's all sorts of things that are not seen, right? But it's not the panelists or the jurors, the curator's job to figure out what they're not seeing. It is our job as artists. And so, there's always a translation loss. The translation loss in something like this is not that enormous, right? In other words, the difference in person and the difference online is, yes, it's, okay, we don't have to argue about how vast that space is, but there is a translation loss. But to me, this would be a translation loss more like translating Italian into Spanish, right? They're both Romance languages. They share a grammatical structure. They share a lot of words in common. And so that translation loss is smaller, as though I was translating poetry from Italian to Spanish. If my work is something like this, Carolyn McMoran's, right? The work is extremely subtle. It's three-dimensional. It's very delicate, right? She happens to take fantastic pictures of this work. And so it really communicates very well. A bad picture of this work is, you're going to be like, what is that? Like, is that a piece of, flotsam from the street, right? And yet the work is very poetic and very delicate. So she has to make that translation loss something that she considers when she takes the picture. So to me, this is a translation loss much more like Russian to Italian, right? Different grammatical structure. They don't even share the same alphabet, right? So that translation loss is much larger. And so the artist, you want to think about that translation loss. This is a way to begin to help you communicate and give access to the object itself through the digital object. So, I mean, there's some stuff that we've always done, right? Make sure that the images really represent the work. Neutral backgrounds, really important. Notice that black flattens everything. And because the digital space already flattens images, to use black is a double flattening. So if you don't want to flatten the space, and I'm talking about a flat painting, you don't want to flatten it more, then black is probably not a good idea. Installation and context shots are really important. They're more important now than they were in this kind of pre-digital world. So when I say do not include like picture frames, furniture, and other objects, and I know that probably most of you, working artists understand that you shouldn't have like, your table or the grass showing in your picture. It still happens. People still do that. Now, the exception, of course, is when you are showing objects in situ, right? In a situation, and those are installation shots or your sculpture or something like that, then that information may be important. Now, there are lots of programs where you can, if you don't have installation shots, there are lots of programs where you can put your work, like if you have paintings and you don't have a big space to do it, and you don't really have context shots, there are apps now that you can pop your work into. You see them on Instagram all the time when it looks like people are putting their images into like beautiful spaces. Very often they've been doing that digitally. That's a great way to get a context shot. And in that case, there might be some more information like the floor, maybe there's a doorway, occasionally a piece of furniture. What I would say is that, there are some programs where you can pop it in and it looks like there's, it'll be over a table and there'll be a plant and a chair, like a bunch of furniture. That's fine for like on your website. Designers use that, galleries use that, so people can kind of imagine the work in their own space. I would counsel you to not do that in an application proposal. An installation shot is fine, but you don't want what I would call like the designer shot, like putting the object into like a domestic space, right? Just different functional reason. Nothing wrong with either one, but they have different purposes. One is to sell the work completely. The other one is to propose your work for exhibition. So these days, and this is something people do all the time. I mean, paintings are photographed in general. There's millions of exceptions to this, but we used to crop paintings, crop the edges of the paintings out and have a black background, right? That used to be a great idea. On slides, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, you'd have that little silver tape that would go around, like crop the image. Yes, Tatiana.
There is a question from Don Sexton about the images. Don, can you hear?
Okay, it says to be clear, you do not, thank you, Tatiana, for pointing that out to me. To be clear, you do not recommend showing only the work, rather always use a background. So I'll never say the word always, right? It's really on a case-by-case basis, but I will say that very often today, paintings are photographed with a little bit of the wall around it, right? Now, there's plenty of times where people don't do that. But the reason for that is because the digital space is a flat space. It will already flatten. And so cropping flattens more. And so showing that the painting has an objectness can be really helpful. So I'm going to give you an example. This is, so someone says, what if a project is lengthy? I'm not sure can you say a little more in that question, and I'll come back to it. So this is a beautiful painting by Craig Stockwell, not a Crit Lab artist actually, but a colleague, a good friend of mine. Beautiful painting, looks great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this picture. It is cropped. There's nothing wrong with the cropping. So I don't want to say that something is like cropping is bad. You have to assess the situation. I'm not going to tell you go back and rephotograph everything if you've already cropped it, but I will tell you that looking at this picture, it looks great. It's very graphic, right? It's a graphic painting, strong colors, saturated, so it communicates very well digitally. The translation loss is relatively small. Yes, you don't want to have photographs of frames. You definitely don't want to have the frames in the photographs. Now look at it here. Now it's not like, you know, the hugest difference, because of course this is not like Caroline McMoran's, those very delicate sculptures, right? That difference. However, I do suddenly see the physical edges of the painting are visible to me. I suddenly see that there is this, and I don't have a cursor, so I can't point in here for some reason, but you know, you can see on the bottom right, there's like a little bit, you see a little bit of the canvas wave. On the top, you can see a very subtle fluctuation in the canvas. Suddenly the physicality of the canvas is much, it is much more visible to me. So if I look at this, right, beautiful, I can still see that this is a painting because I can see some of the texture, but it's much flatter, much more graphic. Here, I get a little bit more of the sense of the physicality. So someone said, oh, this is very low res, I apologize, but I'm giving this as an example. Someone says we should wait for questions till the end. I'm fine with that too. So this is a painting. Now, I took this off her website, so it's a little bit low res, but let's just look at the picture. It's cropped. Now, when I look at this, this is another example of giving kind of context shots. Now, sometimes context is this, right? Seeing the wall. That is also a context shot, which gives me a little bit more information about the object, right, than this. Now, even though I know the 60 by 48, I go, oh, that's pretty big. Like 60 is, you know, that's big. That's like 5 feet, right? That's pretty large. That's a pretty big painting. However, the digital makes scale all look the same, right? Even though intellectually I know that this is 60 by 48 inches, it's very hard for me to imagine my body in relationship to this. However, when I have a shot like this, I'm like, oh, okay, I got a sense of what these paintings look like. I can instantly put my body in relationship to this work. In other words, I can put myself in that space. I'm now in relationship to it. And now when I go back to look at this picture, right? If I was looking at a proposal and it had obviously a better digital picture than this, but I see a picture like this and I've seen this, I have a much better understanding of the objects that I'm looking at. Does that make sense? Really, really important. Now, it doesn't mean that you'd have you might, I mean, the context shot is going to depend on the work. It doesn't have to be, 4 pieces or whatever like this. It could be 1, whatever, but making sure that there's some information. So I was juror on for a show in Boston, and there were lots of pictures that were cropped like this, and people put things like, someone had something that said mixed media. This is something I also recommend, a word that you never ever use. Just put it out of your vocabulary, never use the word mixed media again. The reason is I'm looking at this picture, it's cropped. It wasn't as good a picture as this. It was a little bit closer to this, a little better than this, but not quite as good as this one. And I was like, mixed media, I have no idea what I'm looking at. Like I literally said, as I'm looking at this work, I have no idea what I'm looking at. I actually passed that work by because I couldn't understand. I did not have enough information to understand what I was looking at. And as the juror, I'm looking at 170 submissions. I really don't have time to go back. And also, the idea of the submission process is like to level the playing field. We look at what people submit and we don't look at anything else to try and kind of release some of the bias that might be inherent in the process. This is also not a great picture, but this is another example of work that is really subtle, beautiful. And so this artist might take a picture of this whole installation and then go in and show individual pieces. And maybe the individual shots would be not like, maybe there'd be a shot of 1, but maybe the detail shots would be, 2 or 3 paintings, right? So you still get the sense of this kind of larger work, and yet you can see what this is, right? In a picture like this, even if this was a higher res picture, it would be really hard to see what this is. So if this was the only picture, I would be like, looks really interesting, but I don't know, it says it's paint on this or whatever, but it would be very hard for me to see visually and understand what I'm looking at. So sculpture and installation, very much the same things apply. Black backgrounds always flatten dimensional space. So I would recommend, even if you're cropping paintings, to maybe put a gray background or something like that, maybe on your website or whatever. It used to be that we thought black backgrounds were so great because they show the color really well, but we're working in we have different technological tools now. Sculpture very often seen in situ, right? In other words, in situation, in the room, to give a sense of, sculpture is 3-dimensional. The digital space, to communicate dimensions in the digital space means we have to create pictures that do that, right? So installation shots are crucial, as are details, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So here's a wonderful example of Margaret Scopa's work. This is a fairly small work, so it's not, it's not something it's not an installation size work. So it's photographed on this beautiful kind of pale gray. It might be a white background, but it's adjusted for the light. We can see it's very clear. It's a beautiful photograph of this object. I also can see very clearly what it is. And I have shadow, I can tell that it's an object in space and all of that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful picture. And here is a context shot. Now there's a person in this shot. Whether you put people in is really, most of the time, I don't know, I'm not going to say there's a rule, but probably in this shot without the person would probably be good enough, right? Like we might not need the person. This is, it's just an example of sometimes giving context shot. I probably, if I was also submitting a picture like this, would crop some of the ceiling off, right? And a little bit of the floor. So I still get the context, but remember, if you only have 700 pixels wide, right? Then every one of those pixels at the top is going to take up space. So I would probably crop it like kind of about where that column ends, right? And then a few inches below the white piece on the floor. And I'm gonna save the questions. I think it's a good idea. Here's another example of a installation shot. And Christine Aaron, I wanted to show this because this was at MAG, so it's a great. I don't know that this is the best one of her installation shots, but it does give you a sense. And in this picture, she's doing 2 things. She's showing the installation piece with all the hanging, and behind it is a 2-dimensional work of hers, right? So there's more information also than need. Now, installation is hard because, of course, the light at the top and the ceiling at the top left and all of that, maybe you could Photoshop that out. There's some you really have to work at making these photographs these were from her website. So this is not a criticism of this photo. It's a very nice photo, but we're talking about like, if I'm applying and I have 8 photos only, I have 8 images only, each one of those images has to be like Architectural Digest quality, although art version, right? So here's Caroline McMoran, who's the artist who did those very delicate pieces that were on the wall. So if she had just this, maybe, I mean, it's a very beautiful picture. She takes wonderful photos. This is her studio. So there's, the electrical stuff, but for this kind of work, maybe that's okay. You know what I mean? It's not quite as, I probably would crop some of that out and maybe crop a little bit more of the ceiling. But it's a wonderful photo, and she would have detailed photos so you can really see the materiality of the work. The materiality is very important in this work, and so therefore it would be really important. Now, the detail shot is really important. And a detail shot means something a little bit different, not different, but more important now than it did before. In other words, the detail shot has multiple duties. And remember, when they say 8 images, they don't say 8 images plus a detail. One of those 8, if you're going to have a detail, one of those 8 images is going to be a detail. And so it doesn't mean an extra image, right? So what that means is that detail has a big job to do. It should inform the work that it is a detail of, as well as, like, if I have a shot of like a full work and then I have a detail, that detail should tell me something about the work I just looked at. And then it should also inform me about all of the works that come after. In other words, it gives me access to the real, to the physicality of the work. And then when I look at the next one, like, our brains are savvy. Once we have that information in our head, once we can put our bodies next to the work and understand its physicality, then when I look at the next work, even if I can't see that kind of physicality, I understand what I'm looking at. Right? Everything is about getting people to understand what they're looking at. So for example, this is a work of mine. I mean, you can see what it is. You kind of know what it is. It's doilies. We all know what a doily is. And yet it's a kind of a difficult translation. When I go like this and I have an image like this, then suddenly, right? So for me to have a bunch of images like this, it's too far away, right? Like, it's too big. You don't really have a sense of the physicality of the work. It looks very flat, it looks very graphic, which is all very nice, but it's not enough information. I have to have a detail shot. When you see a detail like this, right? If you were to see a detail like this and then go back, like the next one might be another one of these, then I'm like, oh, I understand what I'm looking at, right? You take that information with you. To the next object. So of course, if you can project your images, then that's great. We don't all have that ability, although now you can get like little projectors that are really wonderful. But what you can do is set the viewing size in whatever program you're using, Photoshop or what have you, to 100% to see how crisp that image should be. Crisp at 100%, because when you're looking at it on your screen, if it's a high res image, you're looking at something that's 50% or 16% or 75%. Set it at 100%, and then you'll be able to see. More than 100%, you don't need to worry. It gets blurry at 200%, but at 100%, you should still be able to see crisp clarity. You should be able to see the surface, the texture, all of that stuff. If not, it may not be a good enough image. Again, just because an image has a lot of pixels does not mean it's a good picture. We can take some bad pictures that are very high res, right? I can attest to that because I'm a bad photographer. So I don't take my own pictures because I know this about myself. I just don't have that. I don't speak lens, I always say. So one of the things to be really, to really consider is follow instructions to the letter, right? When you have a grant, and especially something, again, where it's a bigger thing. I mean, I think this is true in a juried show also, of course, but in larger things, like if you're applying for a residency or you're putting an exhibition proposal to a gallery or a university gallery or a museum or whatever, or you're answering a call for a grant or something like that, those guidelines are there for a reason. They are there to level the playing field so that, like, some entitled dude doesn't come in and be like, well, I don't care if my image is 3,000 pixels and it says 1,500, right? That will be thrown out. And that is to level the playing field, right? So it is there for you. It is a pain in the butt because every single proposal they want 1,500 and this one wants 2,100 and this one. So I understand. And I can talk in more detail about ways to kind of, strategize about that if we have time. But so always follow the instructions. That doesn't mean if there's minor errors, they're not going to throw out the application for that. But if you have not followed the instructions, your work will not even get to the panelist, right? Sometimes the administrators are really kind And this depends on how, if it's the NIFA grant, they're not going to do it. There's just too many applications. They can't. If it's a smaller grant, they might contact you and say, you know, like, you have a little time. Can you fix this? You know, that's happened to me. And I think that's really, really nice, but that you cannot count on that. And, you know, are you following the criteria? Have you given them the information that they need? And, you know, again, artistic voice is the most important thing. Your job is to get them to see your artistic vision and to give them a sense, and as much as you can, access to the real, the IRL, right? Access to the real. Some of the things that I've shown you there are some tips for how to do that. So you can ask how the images will be viewed, right? If you're applying for something like a grant or something like that, this can be really useful information. For example, at one point, I knew that the NIFA grant, when they projected the images, it was like 2 rows of 4 at a time. Like that's how they would do each person, right? So that might mean that I organize my images so that, you know, 2 sets of 2 rows of 4 is like, you know, makes a lot of sense, right? If you had, if it was 3 and then you had another 3 that made a lot of sense, then you might rearrange it slightly for that. Also, knowing whether it's going to be projected or whatever is just good information. Now, I will say this to everybody. Every single arts organization, and all of you MAG people know this as well, Mitchell can attest to this, and Barbara, and everyone can, that all arts organizations are understaffed and everybody's doing the job of 3 people, okay? So please, please, please respect the people. Even in commercial galleries, people are overworked and underpaid. So there's, everyone heard the expression RTFM? I'm not going to swear on camera here when it's being recorded, but it's read the effing manual. That's a little expression that says, before you bother someone with a question, make sure that it's really something that's not in the information, right? Do your due diligence. That's your job, because sometimes the information is not always clear, and that's fine. There is always someone whose job it is to answer questions. Don't ask questions the day the thing is due, because there's not a very high chance that you will get an answer, and also you will annoy people, right? It's a small world, right? Respect people's time. So check beforehand, and you can ask questions like this or other questions. Sometimes the organization will say 72 PPI, but they don't say what the ratio is. So 72 PPI by itself means nothing, right? It means nothing. So you might ask a question, 72 PPI at what? So reasonable questions, because sometimes the person who wrote the, wrote the prospectus is not the doesn't know these things. They just know certain things and they don't have all the information. So follow your instructions. Make sure you include all the documents. Don't overwhelm people with too much material, right? Keep the word, character, and number limits. Now that's is really important, because now everything, if you're applying through Submittable or Cafe or some of these, right, they'll have a field where you can copy and paste your information in, like your statement, for example. So if they say 1,000 characters, you might copy in something there that's 1,020. It'll look like it's in there, but when you hit save, it'll just crop the last 20 characters. So you don't want your artist statement to be like cut off mid-sentence, right? So just make sure you do everything in another folder. Never work on a proposal in the actual proposal site. Work on it separately, get it all perfect, and then upload it. That way you just save yourself a lot of headache, just FYI. The other thing is always keep a copy. So in Submittable and those, you can usually download a PDF of your submission. Don't rely on, I don't trust that Submittable will keep it, even though you should have a record. Download that whole document, put it, everything that you've done for this particular proposal, make a folder, like grant A plus B, juried show A plus B, whatever it is, make a folder, everything that you put, whatever you sent, because sometimes these things can take 6 months, sometimes longer to come to fruition before you get a reply. And let me tell you, I don't know about you, but I have been like, oh my gosh, what did I send them? I can't remember. And sometimes I've even changed the title of a work and they're like, oh, you submitted, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I changed that title. So I can go back to that folder and be like, oh, those are the 4 images. That's the one they wanted. I'm good. You want to save those kinds of hassles for yourself as much as possible. And of course, don't miss the deadline. And I say that because a lot of people wait to the last minute. Like there's no greater feeling in the world when you submit something like 3 days before the deadline. You're like, oh, I'm great. It's a really, really good feeling. At the last minute, you know, there's 1,000 other people uploading stuff at 5 minutes to midnight, right? And sometimes the site crashes or you don't finish it, or, you know, like there's all sorts of problems, and it's very stressful. So I say, plan ahead. I have a spreadsheet which has like deadlines, like, you know, I've done this research, I'll spend a certain amount of time every week or every month or whatever, kind of updating my deadline, my list of things that I want to apply for or propose things to. I will have a deadline list. I will have what it is, exhibition, grant, fellowship, whatever, residency. And then I'll have a link to the website. Sometimes people put in more information, like what's the cost, what is the requirements and all that. For me, the link to the website is enough. The deadline, what it is, and the link to the website is enough. And that way I know a month in advance, you are not going to apply for a grant a few days before. I'm going to tell, I mean, you can, people do all the time, including me. We all wait till the last minute. But when you can give it more time, you will have a much better proposal. You won't be doing it under duress. You won't miss all of the mistakes in there. I like to do it well before so that I can leave it a day or two and then go back and just like read it over with fresh eyes and then submit. And this can be also your aspirational document, right? Like, in other words, maybe I know that I'm not really ready to apply for the Guggenheim, but by next year, that's my goal. So if you know that that date comes around, these big dates come around the same time every year. So you know it's on there, it's in your calendar, it's in your spreadsheet. And it doesn't have to be the Guggenheim. It can be just a show that you know comes around and you want to be part of. And you like have it in your head so you can start a couple months before thinking about it. So, you know, everything I've said here, these are generalized statements, and there's exceptions to every single thing I said. These are guidelines. These are ways to help you kind of think about, you know, doing this whole endeavor of being an artist, which is not that easy, right? And just try and remember, I have two folders. I have like the submitted, the yeses and the nos. And, you know, very often the no folder is bigger than the yes folder. And I always say, well, what that means is, and, you know, it stings, but I also say, you know, it means I'm trying to apply to things that, like, I'm continually applying for better things, right? So that I'm reaching higher, I'm aiming higher, so that my work goes into, you know, better venues, different venues, more venues, et cetera, et cetera. So I have plenty more I can share with you, but I think it's a good time to stop and, oh, there's my cursor, fabulous. Answer some questions. I can also show you some, okay. So someone says, how to show photographic art? Was that the question? From Nancy Carmichael. So how to show photographic art, the same things apply. Now, a photograph is not a painting, right? So it doesn't have objectness. So the edges, it's not so important to photograph the edges unless you are printing. I mean, photography is a little bit like the digital, right? Because it's complicated. Sometimes people do photographic work and the photograph never gets printed, right? They're working only solely digitally. And other times they are printing it out. So I think one of the things with photography is making sure that those images are a good enough resolution that it really communicates. Because sometimes I've seen photographic work where people assumed like, oh, it's a digital photograph, people are going to know. And it was very low res and I still couldn't tell what it was, right? I think that if you print it, then what you would do is you would list it like digital, archival digital print on such and such paper, right? Like the more specific you are in your way that you describe things, the better it is, the easier it is for me to understand what I'm looking at. And photography is printed in lots of different ways. Some people mount it on aluminum. Some people print it on matte paper. Some people print it on gloss. So I think you can really think about that. Okay. What if the time project is lengthy and you're working on it over a long period, you have some finished pieces? Yeah, great question. So if you're doing a proposal, it's fine you can even submit like, you know, like I was in a show at Yukon, Connecticut, and I didn't have the work. I was proposing an outdoor work. I made a digital facsimile, right, of what it would be. That's okay. You can show parts. The thing is, for stuff that's not completely, you know, that you haven't completed, especially like installation work and all of that, then your text is so important, right? Because your text is going to make people understand how those images all fit together into a larger project. So it depends on like, this could be a long-term public project or something like that. So you want to have a little bit of you don't want to have all piecemeal. Like you need something that gives a sense of the whole, right? So maybe that's a finished project and then the work in progress, right? And I'm happy to answer more about that. And you want to submit for the project to get possible grant or show opportunities while working on the portfolio. Okay, so that's a continuation of the same question. Yes, I think it goes along those same lines. People often will be looking at proposals of like projected projects. You can make mock-ups, you just have to make it really clear that that's what it is. Like, don't pretend it's a picture of a finished thing. And so it's a kind of bouncing, it's kind of like the image of my work, like bouncing a little bit between, the idea of the finished object and then some kind of detail information that will help me understand. Pretend like you have to describe this to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, really. That's what the images have to do. They have to kind of make people understand what it is that they are looking at. So if the presentation format allows you to include only one image per work, what would you recommend? So I don't think there's any format that won't allow you to well, maybe there is, but in my experience, when they say there's only one image per work, they will count the detail as one of the images, even if it's a detail. So for me, I will always have a detail because it doesn't make sense for me otherwise. But if you can only have full images, then those photographs have to be really good. It might mean that sometimes sometimes I don't put my favorite one in because it's not the one that most ideally communicates, right, what I'm doing. Or I change the order, right? Even though, for me, this is like the best one and everything. But for this, if I'm proposing something for like a public art project, then I might put at the front the recent project I did in Brooklyn, right? Like, because that is a project that was outside, it's much more of a public project. It's going to put me on that map more quickly than having that further at the end, right? So you're, in a sense, composing each group of images for the particular situation. So most of the time, and again, the exceptions are when someone is really like, their work is so cohesive. Again, like a landscape painter who is, does work that's like plein air and there's a consistency. Now you're still going to organize those works in a cohesive grouping, right? But you have fewer kind of narrative gaps, right? Than someone who's working in a form like mine. That makes sense. So you got to really think about what those images are. They got to be like each image. Think of every image as like a $5 million Madison Avenue townhouse. This is I'm a Manhattanite, so I always relate it to like very expensive real estate. Just like in an artist statement, every single word, $5 million townhouse, right? You can't have a lot of extra chaff in there, right? Like every word counts. So every image counts. Okay, so is there a central source or site you would recommend for juried shows? I'm going to give you a list of resources, places to research information. I know that Cafe, I think it's cafe.com, but the Cafe place where people can upload work, they have a calls for entries and you can sort it by like paid or unpaid, what kind of thing it is. On Submittable, I think also has it. NIFA, College Art. There's a whole bunch of websites where you can research opportunities. I think Cafe is probably the one that focuses primarily on juried shows. In my case, a lengthy printmaking project of which much is in Photoshop and some printed. Yeah, I mean, it's fine to have, to show both, right? To show, you just want to, the kind of, the verbiage is really important. So like what the material is. I mean, I really think with photography, it's so helpful for me to know, like it's mounted on aluminum, it's on like whatever kind of paper, because those things communicate so differently. And that's something that's not necessarily going to be visible in the digital realm. So think of what's not visible, what people can't tell from the digital, and that's the thing that you want to focus on. So what are some of the best ways to learn about upcoming opportunities for shows, residencies, exhibitions, etc.? I think that, again, some of these websites that I've mentioned, and also I'm going to give you a page of probably more things than you need of websites where you can research opportunities. There's a lot of different ones, and it can also depend on what kind of, if you're more interested in jury shows, you're more interested in local things, you're looking for, public art, like there's different places for different ones. So I will give you a document. So someone says, would you address the presentation of a portfolio for virtual review? So you mean like, you know, a virtual studio visit or portfolio review? That's a great question. I think that, of course, it depends, because some of them are like, we'll just have you meet and look at your website. In which case, if it's a website review, not like that they're reviewing your website, but they're looking at it, then I would reorganize my website to kind of specifically for that review. If it's looking at a portfolio, so they're looking at 15 to 20 images, you don't want to overwhelm people. 20 images is a lot for somebody to take in one of those, like they're usually like 15, 20 minutes. So 15 images may be good. Again, there's exceptions, because some people's work, you know, it's easier to look at a lot of images, and other people, the work is dense and more images are not going to give me more information about your overarching practice. The idea that you're wanting to communicate is, or to talk about in those portfolio reviews, is your artistic vision. You don't want to be talking about like, in this painting, you know, there's, you know, maybe you want to add more yellow. That is not the kind of conversation that you want to have in that situation. The kind of conversation you want to have in that situation is my overall vision working? What do you see as my overall vision? What are the kinds of venues that you see this work, you know, like that this work might fit for? Where are the places that you recommend I look for those venues? That kind of stuff, right? And any recommendations about how I might push this work. They're not going to say, you know, add more yellow. They're going to say, think about these ideas, these ideas, these ideas. If you can only submit 2 images for an application, would you show one work in a detail or 2 different works? Probably if it's only 2. To me, it would very much depend on what kind of opportunity it is, right? In most cases, if it's something like a jury show, you're probably going to submit 2 different works. And, you know, it's very, like, for someone like me that does large installation works, that can be a difficult question, because those 2 images might just be not enough information, but that's my challenge, right? That's my challenge. Do you absolutely need a website? Hallelujah, yes. Period. I don't care if it's 1 image, contact information, and a very short bio, but yes, you need a website. I know that some people are like, I don't care about the website and people don't go to it, but let me tell you, I know that, and there's so much focus on Instagram and stuff like that, but a curator may look at your Instagram, may find you that way, right? They may look at the work and go through your Instagram page, but when they want to look a little bit more deeply, they're going to go to your website. Don't wait for the website to be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to just have information on it. Should you list prices on the website or note sold works? That is a good question. And some people put it like this, you know, have the little buy now or that kind of stuff. What I recommend is, and again, people are going to have different opinions about this. I think in a fine art website, I don't want to go there and look at, like, it's not a store, right? It's a website. Now, what you might have on the website is a shop, right? You might have actually a shop link, right? That's in the web, you know, a shop page. And on that page, you have the, you know, works for sale. That will allow you to show sold works, not sold works. And this is me, again, I'm not sort of a big fan of seeing like a big sold sign on there. Now, if there's like a thing you did, like an event, you know what I mean? Or a sale, or you had a open studio or whatever, and the work is available, then sure, put the sold on there. You can also say not available. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's other language that's going to kind of professionalize, the thing. And, you know, today's world is so mixed. So there's no one rule, right? It used to be like, you would never do that. You would never put prices on your website. Now that's not true. You can, but I feel like I want to go into the work, and I don't want that to be the thing. As a curator, I don't want that to be the thing that's like foregrounded at me, right? I want to be able to go in, look at the work, look at bodies of work. I also think that people very often organize their work by year or by media. I sort of feel like that works for some people's work, but I'm not as excited about that as a curator. I'm much more interested in, like, if you had a series, like the such and such series. I mean, maybe you have year, and in the year you have like by series, because it tends to be like paintings, drawings. Sometimes I did a consultation with an artist. We did a website analysis, and, you know, she had work in different, that was organized by, I don't remember if it was time or it was media, it doesn't matter, but there was sort of works in there that I was like, this doesn't make sense. Why is this there? It should be with this other group of works. Like, that because you want to curate it. You want it to be curated. Your website should be curated. It's not just a kind of a doom scroll of images. And it's not just like, oh, I worked with pencil today and I worked with pen tomorrow. It should be organized by ideas. Now, some people, again, I always use a landscape person, not because I don't love landscape paintings, but there's like a shorter translation loss in the website analysis, right? For someone who has like a very consistent painting practice. But like if you're an abstract painter, for example, and you just have hundreds of images of abstract images, then that's very hard for me to parse. I want you to organize that for me so that I am like, again, I am predisposed to want to like the work. I am predisposed. Don't make it harder for me to kind of, oh, okay, well, what's this person thinking about? They're just endlessly like trying different things, or, is there a shape within this grouping of images that might help me kind of say, oh, I don't want to look at 100 images. I want to look at smaller curated groups of images. So the price, I think one of the more elegant ways for me is to have a separate page that is the shop page. And that will also allow you, again, to keep showing work that's sold, but also to allow you to show like, things that may not be as saleable, right? Things that are a little bit unorthodox, or things that are in progress. Like the website is a great place. Think of the website as like your studio, like inviting people into your studio, right? There's organized places, there's works in progress, there's like material information, and there's finished work. There's, all kinds of, so the website, like in other words, your bio might have on your website, maybe your artist statement in your bio has a little more personal information that you wouldn't put in a proposal, because the website is like, I'm inviting someone into my space. So I always think of, I'm sort of a spatial thinker, right? I want to think of, and I do think this is going to be a helpful way for us to move forward as artists, because we are going to be functioning in the digital space. This is not going away. It doesn't mean we're not gonna also have shows and all of that, but you want to understand how the best way to do that. So what apps would you recommend to use to download images of the art? Well, I mean, professionally, artists use the Adobe suite, which is the whole suite of like Photoshop, Camera Raw, InDesign, and Bridge. And I can show you, I actually have a little thing set up. I can show you Bridge and how fabulous it is. It is a very expensive program though. So I'm also going to give you a page that has a bunch of free substitutes for things like Photoshop. If you are an educator, you can get a discounted price for Photoshop. You just have to have like an institutional email, and you can get, it's something like between $20 and $25 a month, which is still a lot of money. But if you're not a teacher, it's like, I don't know, $50 or $60 a month, which is way, like, I can't pay that. So I think that, there are ways to use that. That is the best programs, but there are other programs too. I use it because I'm working in this field professionally and I have to do it. But there are free programs, or, programs that are not as expensive. What are some of the qualities a panel looks to score about your artwork? It's all of the things. Usually the set of criteria will be set up by the institution. So when I was a panelist, I got like a spreadsheet, and it had, here's all of our criteria. So it is definitely like level of, the professional nature of the presentation, originality of the idea, quality of the idea, suitedness for the grant, right? Like this, or the opportunity, because some people's work might be fabulous, but it might just not be right for that project, right? So there's a whole sorts of things. So those are going to vary. I will say one thing, when I was on the Connecticut panel one time, we were down to 2 artists, and this is a very instructive, I'll tell you a couple of experiences of being on a panel. One of that, so we came down to 2 artists, the art was amazing. Both of them, we loved the work. We finally had the very hard thing of eliminating the other people. And one of the artists was very professional. I mean, she had an established career. She, on the face of it, she would be the first choice, right? The proposal was perfect. Everything was great. She had gotten the grant before, like way in the past. And it was a fantastic, the work was great. Everything about it was great. There was another proposal, which was, the work was equally interesting, equally strong. Clearly the artist was not as far along in their career. They didn't have as much experience. The proposal was not quite as polished, et cetera, et cetera. In the end, we gave it to the second person. And the reason was, we sat down and we said, who is going to benefit from this grant the most, right? So every organization has a mission, and grants, especially regional grants, of which you're in Westchester, so the Arts Westchester grant, which is coming up, by the way, is a regional grant. They're going to take that into consideration, right? Like, and when I said earlier in one of the slides, like, for these proposals, it's not just quality of work, but it's also the feasibility. Like, do they feel like this artist is going to use, we're going to give this artist, $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000. Are they going, do we need to feel confident that that artist is going to use that money well? And that the professionalism, sorry, I just have to take a drink. of the proposal can say that. So in that same grant, there was another artist whose work we thought was fantastic, but we clearly felt that this person was not quite ready to receive a $10,000 grant. We just didn't think the work. And so we asked the administrator to write that person a note from the panelists that said they really appreciated the work, and please apply again. You know, we just felt like they weren't quite ready yet. So these things do happen. You don't always get any feedback, so don't be upset. It's just the way it is. So will galleries look at unsolicited emails, including work? It's a really good question. So it really depends. So what I recommend, and I think I have some information on this if we were to move forward, but you do your research, do your homework, because again, remember, think of the person on the other end. Galleries are inundated and all of that. It will say on the website in general, it will say on the website whether they take unsolicited submissions. If it says no, no means no. If it doesn't say, you can call them up and just ask very politely. I'm just calling to inquire if you look at work and what would be the best way for me to introduce my work. If they say yes, then you say, thank you so much. What would be the best way for me to introduce my work? Chances are it's an email short that says, you know, I would love for you to look at my work. Here is my website link, and maybe include one small JPEG. Nobody's going to download you know, a 5 meg. They're not even going to look at it, right? If it's a small image, it'll be visible in the email. They'll kind of say, oh, okay, I'm going to put it in my, you know, my save file or not, right? You know, one of the things I see people do a lot, which I really find problematic, is that I'll get an email that is an invitation or an update on someone's project or whatever, and there's nothing in the email. There's just an attachment. I will tell you that I've never, ever, ever opened one of those attachments because I don't know what it is. And so you want to have something in the body of the email that gives someone you know, don't write a big long thing. You know, a short cover letter is good. If it's completely unsolicited, then the shorter is better. No more than like 5 sentences. You know, I've been following your program. You know, I saw this exhibition and that exhibition and love this work and feel like my work would fit in, right? In other words, you don't want to seem like you're sort of blanketing 50 galleries with the same information, right? Do your homework. So that's something like if you set aside 2 hours a week or 1 hour a week, whatever it is, to do that R&D, it will pay off. It will pay off. It takes time, but it will pay off. So will galleries look? That really depends on the gallery. And if they don't, there are other ways, you know, to kind of get their work, you know, maybe you know some of the artists. I mean, follow the program, and sometimes that ideas open up. And some galleries are just not going to look at. The other way, galleries look at other exhibitions. Like gallerists, they look at the shows, they look at group shows, and they kind of follow what's going on. They're not always looking at juried shows, just FYI. There are some juried shows that they will look at, and some they will not. So, you know, again, that just goes to you doing your due diligence about what kind of venues you're thinking about. How about 2 or more different ways to organize a site? For example, ideas and geography at the same time. Do you mean a website, I assume? So I think that organizing the website is also hard, right? Think of it as a curatorial project, right? Like think of the framework as curatorial. First of all, you want things to be 2 things about a website. They should be legibility, navigability. Those are your 2 things: legibility, navigability, number 1 and number 2. In other words, legibility, I can find stuff super easy. I don't have to click 10 times to find something. Navigability means it's easy to get around. It's easy to get back. I can find your contact information. I know, you know what I mean? Like things are really clear. And artist websites should be fairly simple, right? There should be an about page. There should be like a portfolio page. Maybe there's a separate artist statement and there's a contact page. But the about page could have, you know, the artist statement in it also. So I mean, you know, it depends on what you mean by 2 different ways to organize the site. I do think there can be a shop page, and that's like your commercial spot, and calling it a shop is great. It says exactly what it is. And that means I'm free to look at the other work without feeling pressured about the sales, right? Because as a curator, I'm not interested in that. I'm not there to sell your work. I'm looking at your work because I'm interested in showing it. And so that shop thing for me is going to seem slightly not as interesting. In terms of like geography or ideas, I think, you know, most artists work in like either series or bodies of work, you know what I mean? So think of like giving the thing a shape. What is the shape of this body of work? I don't know if that's more clear or not, and you can chime in about that, what that means. But because there's not one way, because everybody's work is so diverse that, you know, what works for one person won't work for another. But I have found that, especially in very media specific communities, such as like encaustic or cold wax or whatever, people organizing the work by encaustic and cold wax, for me, I don't find helpful. I'd much rather you have like, you know, I mean, maybe you have encaustic, but you know, you're an artist, like what you're using encaustic because of the types of things it does for you as an artist. So maybe in the encaustic page, there's like a grouping, like, you know, I can't make up anything, right? Geography, and the other one is maps, and the other one is whatever. In other words, like a smaller grouping of body of works. And maybe it's by year, but I just don't find, like, by year doesn't give me any insight into your thinking. Like if I'm looking at your website, I want to know, you know, how you're thinking, how you're framing the work. Framing the work is your, you know, your sort of meta of your artistic vision, or your meta. Any other questions? So I can, if you know, keep typing them in there, I can show you just a couple of things in Bridge. Oh, okay.
Patricia, can I just make a technical suggestion
Sure.
from somebody that's receiving images all the time?
Yeah.
And also for Tatiana as well, from MAG and other art galleries, when you're submitting images for show or publicity or whatever it might be. Always change the label on your image. Do not leave the camera number on your image. Always relabel it with your name, the title of the work, the media, the size, whatever the information that you need to relate to the gallery. Because sometimes images come in, and yes, we know the email came from Joe, you know, Mountain Joe, but we don't know any information about the work. And just adding it in the email doesn't help us keep that image on our file without having the information on that file, what it is.
Absolutely. Never, ever, ever, ever send out a thing that says IMG 6328.
Right.
It becomes detached from you. And there's, I mean, I also, like, I have gotten, when I was gallery director, we would get submissions and people would have a file that said artist statement. And then we would download them all into a folder. And I'm like, I don't have the time or the staff to go back and figure out whose email that file was attached to. I don't have the time. So then we write in the trash. So so we have 3:30, we have a half an hour. I'm going to give you the options of what would feel most, you know, most interesting or useful to you. And part of it, so we could do, someone says, for example, I do a series on weddings in different countries, can be organized by wedding or geography. I probably would have a page that's wedding, and then in the wedding page, I would organize it by place, right? Does that make sense? I don't know who the person is that, oh, okay. Does that make sense, Don?
No, it wouldn't. It'd be too much complication. I was thinking more, and I don't want to take time on this, but more, I could really almost have the images in two places. One would be by, let's say, France, and the other would be by weddings. In other words, depending on what you're interested in, you go to one part of the site and you see those images. You follow?
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, look, if we sat down and we looked at your site together, I would probably tell you. I have a feeling putting like duplications are probably not a good idea because it's confusing. But you know, there are ways to organize things within things, right? So let me ask you guys. We have half an hour. I can go on to sort of more technical stuff like Mitchell was talking about. I have a whole thing about that. Or I can show you Bridge and just show you a bunch of images in Bridge. What would be more, I know this is really hard to do like a poll on Zoom. What feels more productive? Why don't you guys, everyone type into the chat or we can continue with questions. I'm happy to field questions and to look at, I can even look at a website or two if you want.
Well, I have one comment. If you, I'm not interested in the Bridge just because I wouldn't be able to buy that. So, you know.
No, it's an excellent point. I think I would show you Bridge just to show you how some of these programs work, but point taken. I know it's so hard. I mean, it's terrible that it's so expensive, and especially now because you used to be able to get the program and it was on your computer, and now it's only in the cloud. So like you're kind of caught.
Excuse me though, didn't you also say there were some other ways to do things that were similar, that were not so costly?
Yes, I'm gonna give you a page of like free alternatives to Photoshop. So, I mean, it's kind of a different workshop to go through like the minutia of the technical stuff, but I feel like I'm getting technical stuff here mostly. So I can continue with that. And, you know, just, you know, give me whatever questions, throw the questions at me. All right. So one of the things that I will recommend, and this is really hard. I didn't put in, I don't have all of the filing system stuff in here, but make a filing system. Keep it simple. I recommend you have a folder that is just like all your art stuff. And then you have a folder for your bio, like your documents, like bios and CV, bio, CV, artist statements. So that's one folder, all your documents. Separately folders inside, artist statements, bio, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have a folder with your master images. I didn't put all of that in here because we were going to just talk about packages, but I will say something really important to you. When you get your pictures from a photographer or when you take them yourself, make sure you have TIFFs. Okay. I'm going to go through in a second. Well, you know what? I'm going to go through in a second. You're going to have a master folder. So just bear with me a second. So make a folder for art packages. And then inside that one, do it by year. And inside that one, I have like working on, like in progress, submitted, yes, and no. I have 4 for 2021, right? And so I know exactly where those are. I make a folder for ones that I know I'm going to do, right? And that's where you keep a copy of everything that you've submitted. Okay, so digital files, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but a lot of people don't. You'll have a copy of this. So these are the different kinds of files. I will tell you that JPEGs suffer from degradation, okay? We use JPEGs over and over and over again, but let me tell you, they degrade. So what you want to do is you want to have TIFFs that are your master files, and every time you want to make a new like proposal, you make new JPEGs from the TIFFs. Now, I know we all use JPEGs over and over again, but FYI, they degrade over time. There's something called pixel rot. And I've learned a lot about this in the recent years. But so every time you edit and save a JPEG, it deteriorates. It's kind of like in the old days when you make a copy of a slide, right? So these are the different forms. And then of course there's PNG is becoming much more common. And the GIFs are the you know, the ones that move. PNG is a great file for web. And then of course, PDFs are what you want to save your documents in. Whether you're working with Pages or Word, save it as a PDF. That way the formatting is preserved. If you send people Word documents, they can sometimes, the formatting can get all sort of funky. I'm looking at my chat here. See someone.
She should answer.
So someone said, I am an impressionistic landscape artist. How do I find a set of galleries that would be receptive to my type of work? That is the research that you have to do. And so what I recommend is, and I think what I'll do is maybe start with galleries within 25 to 100 miles of where you live. Now, if you're in New York, 25 is plenty, right? If you're in Saskatchewan, you might have to go quite a bit further. So start with local galleries. What you have to do is you have to research the galleries. One of the ways that you can do that is Art in America publishes a yearly guide. It doesn't mean every single gallery is in there, but there's also the internet. I mean, you could just say art galleries, you know, I sometimes use Google Maps now, right? Like just type in Google, like get into your area and then type in art galleries. But the research is really up to you. There's no place that's sort of going to kind of collect, you know, galleries that show landscape paintings. So you have to do that research. Remember that every gallery has a kind of a point of view, right? So the landscape gallery is not going to show conceptual art. The conceptual gallery may not show traditional landscape, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the work. I would start making a list. Okay, I'll tell you one of the great ways to find out where your work fits is to look at other artists whose work your work is in conversation with, right? So if you know other fantastic landscape artists that you really respect and admire, go to their CV and look at where they show. Look at where they started out look at the residencies they went to, look at the grants that they got, look at the galleries that they show at. You can have both a gallery that maybe you could apply for now and maybe one that's like an aspirational, right? That kind of thing. So that's I mean, other artists are incredible, you know, mine their CVs. Those are maps. Those are maps for you. It doesn't mean yours is going to be exactly, you know, your career is going to be the same, but it's going to give you information. That's probably even more useful. That's probably one of the most useful ways to do it.
Mhm.
I'm going to go back to, all right. So we all understand pixels. And you're going to get this, so I don't feel like I will take the time now. You can read this. But one of the things that people don't understand is that the way that pixels function. So when you say that something is 72 PPI, that means pixels per inch. That just means how many pixels per inch will be shown. That means you can have an image that is 72 PPI that has 1,000 pixels wide, or it's 800 pixels wide, still 72 PPI. So that means that, look at this original pixel, right? So that means that PPI is, the most important thing is how many pixels the total image is, how many pixels wide, the whole, that's more important than like 72 PPI. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, if I picked 72 of these, say it's only this much, right? So it's going to mean that when I show this on a screen at 72 PPI, this image is going to be huge, right? Because it's only showing 72 pixels per inch, but it has like 3,000 pixels. So it means that the image is going to be huge. If it's going to appear huge on the screen. If I only have 800 pixels and 72 is not that big, the image is going to fit right on the screen. So you have to have the relative scale. This is the most confusing thing for people, I think. Some of the recommendations. So when you email something, you don't want to email something that's like, I mean, it's changing, of course, because our computers can handle more and more and more memory. But, you know, a small image to email is fine, 600 to 800 pixels, right? Your website's going to be 600 to 800 pixels. Your home printer only prints at 200 PPI, so you don't really need it to be a huge print. For portfolios, around 2,000 pixels has become kind of, you know, again, it keeps getting larger because our computers can handle more and more memory. But if you're emailing someone, you're not going to email them a 5 megabyte file unless they've asked for it, because they're not going to want to. I just had to email a bunch of images for an exhibition, and the emails got rejected because they were too big, right? Like, institutional emails won't take big images. So you need to know what, you know, what size they're looking for. When you're just sending someone an informational image, it should be small. When you want to send them larger ones, then you can do that, but you can also do it through, like, you know, an FTP site, right? Or Google or something like that. When you're printing, you need something that is 300 PPI at 8 by 10. That means that the image wide, if it's 8 inches wide, it'll be 300 times 8, right? Right? Do you understand now how the pixels work? It'll be, what's 300 times 8? It's 2,400, right? So somebody check my math. Whereas if I had a 300 PPI and it was 2 by 3, then there's only 600 pixels wide. This is why the PPI is not the most important measurement. Now, remember, you can make an image smaller, but you cannot make it, well, you can make it bigger, but the computer is going to make stuff up. So this is why I say have a master folder with all of your TIFFs. You never touch those. You only copy them. That way you don't end up accidentally taking a really good big image and accidentally making it small because you're sizing it for an opportunity, and then you lose that big image. You will never get it back. When you make a small image big, the computer will just make up the pixels. It'll say, oh, there's a blue square one here. I'm going to put 3 more blue square ones next to it, which is essentially what a JPEG does. It's a compressed file. It makes up information. Raw images are raw images TIFF. Good question. So raw images are the images that come right out of the camera. So they're not TIFFs. They're actually not like usable files, right? They have to be, they're like, all the data is in there, and then they have to be turned into another form like a TIFF in order to be usable. But a TIFF is also a file that has all of the data, right? Whereas a JPEG throws away data in order to sacrifice size. These are some, I'm gonna make sure these are all accurate because this is I don't know, from last year. And, sometimes these things change, but I'll update this before I send it to you. Now, what Mitchell said is so important. Creative labeling system in all of your folders for yourself. Never, ever send, and always last name, first name, or initial. Now, every organization is going to have not everyone, but this is a convention. Do this for yourself, and then you can adjust it for, like I just got a thing where I had to send it and they were like, put the last name, first name, title of the work, dimensions. And I'm like, do you know how long my titles and my media is? That's going to be like a 3-line long title. But anyway, you do what they ask, but in your folder, just have everything labeled. That image information will stay with it. It's really important, just for all the reasons that Mitchell said, incredibly important. The other thing is, when you are sending someone a group of images, if you do not number them correctly, then the computer will sort them alphabetically or numerically. So this happens all the time. People put a bunch of images in and they're like, they name them by title or whatever, and they come in any old order. If you're sending someone a group of images, you spent all that time curating it. You want it to show up in that order. So 01, 02, 03. If you just do 1, 2, 3, and you have more than 10, then it might sort it like 1, 11, 12, right? It'll sort it by numbers. It's not usually that much of an issue today, but, and you're usually doing less than 10, but just FYI, just, if you just kind of institute, you always do 01, 02, then you never have to worry about it. I think I'll skip over this for now, unless there's some stuff that you guys feel really. So starting with the galleries in your area, I think that's really important. If you are talking to galleries and artists, someone says, if the show says they are selecting blind, will it be a problem that your name is on the image? So that's a really good question. So very often in those, this will depend on, like, they will tell you, right? They will tell you how to name your files. So some jury things are blind, which I'm sort of not a fan of blind juries, partly because I feel like one of the ways that artists get known in their community is that people get to know their work. But that being said, there are some that are blind. Usually they'll say no information on your document, right? Like, so your artist statement will not have your name on it, all of that, make sure that you do that. But whether or not they want your name in the file name is going to be something that they will determine, because it may be that the administrator puts it into a form like PowerPoint or something like that, that doesn't have the name, but they need the name so that they can tell what the image is, who the image is from. Do you know what I mean? So I would check the instructions and ask if it's a blind jury, because they'll probably have a 2-tiered system. So there's lots of reasons why, I think creating goals and stuff for what you're, what you're wanting to do is really important, right? And just understand, again, really always think about the person who's receiving this stuff on the other end. And there's all sorts of reasons why people are going to say no to you, or why you're not going to get the grant. I mean, when there's a grant, like maybe the person before you was like the greatest artist ever, or that year, like 500 painters applied and 2 sculptors, and you're one of the painters, right? Like or maybe they had so many painters last year, they're focusing more on other media this year. There's all sorts of reasons why your work is not selected. If there is feedback, you can sometimes ask. If they say no, just leave it. I think it is great protocol to thank people even when you get rejected. I make this a point. I send just a nice note that says, I'm disappointed, but thank you so much for your consideration. I hope to apply again, something like that. People are really kind of, people remember especially they remember the ones who emailed and said, how dare you? Politeness, like just being understanding that this is a complicated landscape and it's hard for all of us, and that they had to make hard decisions. And sometimes they'll email you and say, you were in one of the finalists and we just couldn't, you just didn't make it, but we love your work. I've gotten some of things like that. And you're like, oh, it feels so good. I mean, I'm really sad that I didn't get it, but at least that, people are really looking. These are people who really, they're predisposed to be interested in what you're doing and to like the work. So don't make it more hard, more difficult for them. Someone says, what about participating in an art fair? So it depends on what kind of art fair you're talking about, right? So the big art fairs like the Armory or, there's so many of them now, right? Basel and all of those. those are organizations that are generally, galleries have to apply and don't get in, right, to those shows, right? So galleries will apply and get in, and then the gallery will choose which artists will come in. There's a couple of shows, why am I blanking on the one? There's one that's artists, that's like you can apply as an individual artist. For the most part, art fairs are galleries and not individual artists. Now there are more like art fairs. That's the same thing, art fair. There's like the Armonk Art Fair. There are those kinds of like outdoor community-based ones. I think those are great. They're just different. They have a different, the kind of primary motivation of those is for artists to set up a booth and to sell their work, which is great. I'm not against that at all. It's not a place where, you know, if you're looking for curators and stuff to go, they're not going to go there. But I mean, I have friends who've done nothing but that and had very successful careers, bought a house and lived, you know, very nice life. So really depends on, oh, Clio, thank you, Jackie. Clio is the name of the art fair that artists can apply to, the New York Art Fair that artists can apply to. Someone asked, do you send an actual note or an email? That's a really good question. That's going to depend, right? I think sometimes when you've had someone who has supported you in your work, you know what I mean? Like a curator has shown your work or whatever, if you can send a I mean, you know, how good do you feel when someone sends you a handwritten note, right? And I think an email is also okay. It just depends on, what you don't necessarily going to send a handwritten card for a rejection. Do you know what I mean? You will send an email. When they send you the email, like when they send you the rejection email, that's the time where you'd be like, thank you very much. You know, thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to have, you know, at least tried, whatever. And, you know, people often really appreciate that. They won't answer you back, but it doesn't matter. They may really appreciate that. So I feel like I'm going to, so, you know, figure out what's the most efficient way. Don't overload people with information. Don't show them everything you've ever made, right? 2 years if you can, 5 years max. Less is more, less is more. And again, every situation is different. Like why you're sending and how much you're sending is really dependent. If someone hasn't asked you for something, then you're only going to send them like a note and one image and a link to your website. Like that's why you need a website. Because if I'm interested, I will go to the website. I mean, I will. I'm more likely to go to the website than to download 10 images that are in an email, just FYI. Always have a letter, you know, like a note. This says snail or email. We're not sending snail mails. I have to update this, but I think this is obvious stuff. And whoop. So keep trying. There's a lot of artists. We're all out there doing it. And people really do remember what they've seen. I'll give you another example I started to say before. I was on a panel for an artist residency, and the administrator was a curator at another museum. They didn't participate in the panel. They just set it up. They kind of did all the administering of the work throughout the day. We were there for a whole day. And again, people, you know, we were there for a whole day, and that was a pretty small, that was like maybe 150 applications, right? If you're talking about NIFA and those, they'll be, or the Connecticut grants, you're talking about anywhere from 500 to several thousand applications. So people, when they get to the final ones, sometimes at the NIFA, they might be there for several days or a couple of days. So we were doing that. When we were all done and we had chosen the artist, the curator said, you know, this artist, so-and-so, had applied to our residency like the year before, not even that long ago. And we didn't even look at the application. It just wasn't up to par. Like it just didn't, you know, it just wasn't good enough. It wasn't strong enough. And he said, this shift here, that like that work has come so far and his proposal has come so far. I'm going to email him and encourage him to apply again. So, you know, people do look at the work and remember it. So no can mean not yet. No can mean not for you, and no can mean not in a million years. You don't know which one. You don't know which one. We don't know which one. No, it is. So it can be distribution, duplicity, comparison to last year's pool, who's in this year's pool, and what is the focus of this particular opportunity. So distribution is like, sometimes they want to spread it out, like they have too many painters, so they won't take all of them. Or sometimes last year they had too many, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I always show a couple of rejection letters. This one is from Tim Burton. When he was in high school, he sent this, but how wonderful is this? Someone at Walt Disney wrote back and said, you know, that it was really, you know, they weren't going to do it, but they loved it. And imagine the encouragement that young man felt, right? And then, of course, Andy Warhol got rejected from the Museum of Modern Art. Probably Alfred Barr regretted that later, but in 1956, that was a rejection. Yeah, I'll stop the share now. So any final questions or comments or anything like that? Anything I can help you with from any of you or from Mitchell or folks? Jackie, yes.
I have a question. You said to always have your name on everything because it gets put into files. When they ask you just for the title of the work, should you put your name on that anyway, or not necessary?
I mean, it depends on what it is, but I would always have my name. Like if it's, you know what I mean? Because things get separated from other things. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You always want your name to be attached to everything. I mean, you don't want to like plaster it all over the things, but like, you know, in any reasonable way, yes, I would have the name in there.
Thank you.
You know, and the thing is, if someone says, oh, what's the information on here? You might be like name, title, year, medium, size. You might just give them all of it instead of just like randomly, oh, what's the title? Oh, what's it? Just like kind of professionally, like all of that data is included.
Even if it's just not asked for, just put it in the title where it asks for title, put all the info.
I would put all the info. Now, sometimes if they want it in the file name, that's, you know, you just want to pay attention to what they've asked for.
Right, if it's in a, okay. Okay,
Any
thank
other-
you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Patricia, yeah, I changed my name. When you said your title names are long, and when it comes to working out something, do you always put the full title, or do you just give part of the title all the time? What do you do?
Yeah, it's a really good question because not only do I have really long titles, but I also have like really long media. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I do know what you mean. Absolutely.
So it's really kind of it really depends on the circumstance. I mean, I can't put everything in. It would literally be like a 4-line long thing. So I try and kind of have an abbreviation, and then I try and have the information also in a separate place. Like in
Well, that's what I've been doing, because sometimes I've got like 3 or 4 different things in a print, and the title could be long as well.
I know. It's a hard, because some of this stuff is like there are conventions that are kind of, you know, that we inherit conventions, right? And that convention that like we just, you know, it's short, like title meaning side. And the convention that people don't, you know, that people have more complex titles and information just hasn't translated over for some people. And I think a lot of times in a commercial one, they want that information in the file name so that they can easily locate it. So,
Right.
I mean, sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to put it in, like you deal with the fact that it's a 5-line. It's what you asked for, you know? I don't, because they can just click on it and paste it. You know what I mean? So
Just a suggestion also, sometimes I create, if I'm sending more than 1 or 2 images, I'll send a information sheet. with
Oh,
the same
absolutely.
information as an additional, you know, document with
Absolutely.
all the materials and names and everything on an
Yeah.
information sheet, and keep the numbers the same, 01, 02, so they can reference back to the image.
exactly. I mean, I had that in the thing. I skipped over it a little bit. You'll get it in the document. It's so important. I mean, usually some places want both. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They don't want to have to look at the document and then figure it out. But to me, in most places, especially more curatorial things, the number 01 and then that in an image sheet is going to suffice. I think in a lot of like, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to say.
No, I think a lot of places they even ask for an information sheet to your point, Mitchell. Another question I have is, we didn't talk about, if you want to, and say they're not having a show, but you know they have a gallery and you're thinking, gee, my work might work well at a college or university, and I'd like to see about that possibility. In my case, a lot of the work is Judaic in flavor. So I might reach out to, I'm not going to go as far as the Rose, but at Brandeis, but there are other institutions. Why not? Yeah, but I'm just saying. So
I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to be sensitive and respectful of
but I'm saying,
yeah, it's a good
what
question.
about, we didn't talk about reaching out to colleges and universities.
So if you go to the College Art Association website, which is
Okay.
in the resource thing, they have an opportunities thing.
Okay, perfect.
Now you have a particular, this is a great point. Like you have a particular like subject interest, right? So for you, whether it's Judaica or it's like environmental art, for example, you can
Right.
do specific research on those ideas, right? University galleries are great places to show your work, right? And all of them, most of them will have some kind of proposal system. Sometimes it's dated, sometimes they take ongoing submissions. You can go to CAA will have any that have dated ones, but if you feel like there's a college where you're interested, go to their website, the gallery will state it, or email the gallery director and just ask. Then you could put together a whole, this is not really, I mean, this is a proposal. This was more about portfolio, but I
Right.
could expand it to say what's in a proposal. It's usually going to have images, image list, CV, bio, artist statement, and a proposal, which is the exhibition proposal. Like, this is what I propose this exhibition to be.
Right.
So how detailed that is depends on the situation. And once you have a proposal together, you can shop that proposal around pretty easily. Like it's a lot of work to put it together, but once you have it, it's not that hard to kind of like a university gallery is a good place where you don't have to change a proposal every time. Again, it depends if they ask for that, but so that's the way I would approach that. I think it's a great way to show, especially work that is, has a thematic, like they love things that have a thematic, right, idea, something that can connect with the curriculum of the school. It has an educational aspect or whatever.
Exactly.
If you can offer a workshop or a thing, they love that. Put that in the proposal. But I would
Exactly.
just reach out and ask them, if it doesn't say on the website, just reach out. Do you accept proposals? What is the best form to send it to you?
And to your point, a community outreach will enrich anything that you're offering
In an educational situation, yes.
in an educational situation. Yeah, exactly.
Don, you have a
Yeah,
question.
just a real quick technical question. Most proposals I see, I want 72 PBI. My stuff is 350. Is that a problem?
Yes, so this is what I was saying before.
Yeah,
You
I
can
wanna-
change a 72 PPI to a 350 to a 72 or a 72 to a 3 without changing the number of pixels.
But
This is
don't they want more resolution? Wouldn't they want more resolution?
No, but see, this is what I mean. Okay. There's not enough time to do the detailed version of this, but this is the most confusing thing about digital images. So like took me a long time, but because I do this all the time. So if your image is 3,000 pixels wide.
No, I'm not talking about the size of the image. I'm talking about 350 PPI.
No, but let me explain.
Yeah.
What does the DPI 350 versus 72 is not the thing that you want to think about first. What you want to think about first is it's a high resolution image, means it has a lot of pixels. So maybe it's 3,000 pixels wide. The only thing that the 350 or the 72 is doing, it's not telling you how many pixels. It's telling you how many pixels per inch it's going to show. So you can have an image that's 2 by 3 inches, and at 300 DPI, it's going to be, what's it going to be? 150, 300, it's going to be 600 pixels wide, right? 350 per inch. That's 700. Sorry. Don't count on me for the math. Right? If it's 2 inches wide and it's 300 PPI, it's going to be 750 wide. If it is 3,000, it can still be 350. It's just going to change the size of the image. It's a relative measurement. So 350 PPI by itself doesn't mean anything, right? So you can go into Photoshop. Do we have one? I mean, if you need to leave, thank you so much. You will still get all of the information, but if you want, I can show you exactly what I mean. It's way easier to show you than to describe it.
I'm just saying that I always reduce it to 1,500 pixel width, which is what they ask for, but it still remains 350. So,
but you can change the 350 without changing the 1,500 is what I'm saying.
Okay, I'm confused. I don't know why you want to do that, and maybe we should move on, because I thought the higher the PPI, the more precise the image would be.
Let me show. If you want to stay for this, I'll just give you I'll just show you really.
Do that. Thank you.
No, because this is the hardest thing, right? It really is. Let me just find. I had some of these up here that I could show.
I don't want to take up the time of others.
Well,
This is helpful.
We're kind of, nearing the close here. So if people understand this and they're like, I'm good, they can go. And if you want to stay, then, but let me show you, because this is one of the hardest things. So here's an image of mine. This is a TIFF. I'm going to show you the image size. So as you can see, and hopefully I can do this because this is, Everyone can see that okay?
Yes.
So do you see that it is 3,634 pixels high by 2,773 pixels wide, right? Can you see that, Don?
Yes, but the resolution is 300. It's not 72.
I know, let me show you. So this is clicked. So resample means I can change the pixels. If I unclick resample, I can click this to 72, right? Do you see what the pixels stayed exactly the same? What changed is now it's 38 inches wide by, 50 inches high. So let me change it back. Do you see that? Pixels have not changed. Now, if I resample and I want to change it, then I'm going to alter the pixels. You don't want to alter the pixels, right? You want to keep, so the pixels are what says that it's a big file, not the resolution. Resolution is about how it looks on the screen. So I'm going to unclick this. I'm going to change it back to 300. Watch what happens with width and height. Now it is 9 by 12. So when it's 300 per inch, right? 300 times 9 is 2,773. And when it's 72, then it's 38 inches wide because it's only 72 per inch. It only shows 72 little squares per inch. So the PPI is only how it appears on the screen or like the print size.
Isn't that
So-
important if they're judging your work? Don't you want it as precise as you can be on the screen?
They're equally, like I have not changed the resolution of the picture. I've only changed how big or small it will appear on the screen. So if they want 72, that means that they've set up a projector or a monitor that views things at 72 PPI. The most important thing for you is like this number here.
Right.
But again, watch, I can change it to 300. I have not changed this. I have not changed how many pixels are in that image. It's the same, like it's just as high res. It's just going to show smaller or bigger on the computer screen or the projector.
Patricia, can you just do it one more time?
Yes, I know. This is the most confusing thing. It throws
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Trust me. Okay. I'm going to stop for a second just because I want to show you. So this is,
Thank
this
you.
image is 33%. Do you see this down here? If I make this image 100%, if I could actually zoom in even more to see the pixels. This image is 2,000, I can see it here. I don't know if you could see it. 2,773 pixels across, right? And it's 3,634 pixels high. So that's not going to change. So that's a pretty dense image, right? High res. What the PPI is showing is how it's appearing on the screen. So this is at 33% because it's at 300. So the most important thing is to not have that clicked. Okay, I'm going to resample so you can see. Look at this number up here, pixels. If I resample it and I change it to 72, I lost all those pixels. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm going to cancel because I don't want to lose all those pixels, and I'm going to go back. Now, if I click this, I mean, I make sure this is unclicked. It's default unclicked now, which is good because it used to be default click. You always had to change it. This means what I'm not doing, I'm not changing how many pixels are in this picture. There's still 2,000 whatever across by 3,000 whatever high. What I'm doing is changing how it is viewed on the screen. Okay, I'm going to show you then, if I change this to 72, notice the pixels have not changed. And I go to 100%. I don't know if this is going to make a difference here because it's, oops. It's not going to make a difference.
So
It has to do with the 72 or the 350 has to do with how the number of pixels is distributed across the screen.
So it's about the size on your computer screen. But if they do it 2 rows of 4, what difference does it make? Well, don't they readjust it anyway?
No, it's like it. I mean, some of it is kind of old. Some of it is one of these things that's like left over. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it also has to do with projectors. So like if you have a projector that shows the images at 72 PPI, then it will mean that all of the images will show up at the same scale. I know it's a very confusing I'm not sure if I made that clearer to anybody. Can anybody restate it in a way that's clearer than what I said?
So what you're saying is that all that manipulation of the size and the pixels per inch at the bottom are just for someone else's viewing of your work.
Yes.
But is it the same in preview if you're on an iMac or any Apple product and you don't have Photoshop? When you bring up an image, you get preview as you're manipulating.
Right, but preview is just a preview program. It's preview is a preview program, so it's not a program that. So let me.
Wait, so were you in Photoshop just now?
Yeah, I was in Photoshop, but it's going to be true in any preview is just an editing. It's not an editing program. It's just a viewing program. Now you can do some editing in preview, but you can't do any detailed editing. You need by Jackie. You need you need some kind of photo editing program, right? Where you can actually go in and change the pixels. Preview doesn't do that. I mean, I feel like I'm jumping over kind of swaths of information just because of time. But what I will say is that in today's world, there's also, one of the problems is that there's all sorts of apps that kind of do stuff for you without you really understanding what they're doing, right? So explaining this to you is like, I can have an image that is, 3,000 pixels wide by 5,000 pixels high. And that image can display at 72 PPI or at 350 PPI and have exactly the same number of pixels. I can have an image that has 500 pixels and I can set it at 72 PPI and I can set it at 350.
So what measures the density of the the crispness of the image?
How many pixels are across the whole image? That big. So if I go back,
sized for that to mean anything, you have to know the size of the image.
No, you don't. The size, because this is like, it's not a real space, right? The size is arbitrary. I can make this any size I want without changing any of the pixels. What matters digitally is that there are 2,773 pixels across the width of this. That's my important number. And there's 3,634, right?
But don't you have to know the inches, the size, to know how dense that is?
No.
That's pixels per inch.
No, the pixels per inch is how it gets viewed. It doesn't change the density of the image.
Well, what does measure it then, please? The density of how precise.
The density of the image is measured by how many pixels are, like the total number of pixels. So if I was to do the math, I would go 2,773 times 3,634. I would get like how many megapixels it is, right?
Sorry, to me, that's a measure of area. It's not a measure of density. That's why I don't understand it.
So what is the measure of density is how many pixels are in the image. That's the measure of density.
I love you.
I'm sorry, I'll stop. I'm stopped.
It's okay. I mean, it's a very difficult, because it's inside the digital space, the size of not the size of the image. The size of the image is based on how many pixels in the digital space. We need to translate that into real physical space. We translate it into physical space by using how many inches it goes.
Pull out, in and out.
Okay, but everything you've been doing has just been working on, whatchamacallit, Photoshop though.
Yeah, but any viewing program that has access to the pixels will do exactly the same thing. It's
Perfect.
this is not the deepest thing. Like Photoshop does all kinds of things that other things don't do. Let me just show you one last thing and maybe this will help.
Okay.
If I want to print this, Dawn, this is like where it comes into, where we then translate a digital thing into an object, right? If I want to print it, then if I print this at 72 PPI, then it's going to be 38 inches wide by 50 inches high because there's 2,000 pixels.
I understand. But
If I-
galleries have told me they prefer more than 72. If I can give them more than 72, they prefer it.
Right, because they don't really actually understand how this works.
Apparently not. Apparently
No,
not.
I mean, it's true. This is why this happens all the time. Like people, they understand, the only thing they know is 72 PPI. They don't know that 72 doesn't mean anything. So if I do it at 350, I can print an 8x10. It'll be a very beautiful image because it's nice and high res. There's lots of pixels, but I haven't changed the actual size of the digital file.
Perfect.
You see what I mean? So it's the translation from wanting to make this digital object into a physical object. That's where the DPI matters. And
Thank you so much.
Okay. I know, I feel like I've just confused you more, but it is the most confusing thing. But one thing you have to understand, the first thing you pay attention is to how many pixels are in the image. Because if you change it to 72 PPI and you end up throwing out all those pixels, you've just turned a really beautiful big image into something that has very few pixels. So 72 PPI at 8x10 is really different than 350 PPI at 8x10. Because 350 PPI at 8x10 means every inch has 350 pixels. So that's a lot of pixels. It's those measurements only work when they're relative.
I know.
Okay, thank you, Patricia.
So one more question on that.
Sure.
Let's see, is there a difference in how you want to submit it if you think it's going to be seen on a computer or on a screen?
The difference is what the institution
Because-
asks for.
Read the instructions.
I heard you.
Thank you,
Let's say
Patricia, so much.
Let's
Thank you.
say they said 72 PPI and nothing else.
I know. So that's
What I'm asking.
I know. That's an excellent time for you to email them and say, this is unclear. I need to know 72 PPI at what? This is when
You need to know the size, the longest side or the,
right. You just
Sometimes they say and sometimes they don't.
I know. So just know that that's not your failing. Somebody in the administrative chain didn't understand what that meant. Do you know what I mean? So that's you say, do you want 72 PPI at 8x10 or do you want 72 PPI at like 6 feet? You know what I mean? Like it really makes a difference. The more important thing is that what people do now, when they've like places that have professionalized or kind of, not carried over this legacy, is they will not ask, well, they will ask for PPI, but they will ask, I want something that's like Dom's saying, 1500 pixels wide. And I can go in and change 30 images to all be 1500 pixels wide and 72 PPI, or I can change all those images to be 1500 wide and 350 pixels. That's not going to 350 PPI. It's not going to change the pixels. So the more important thing is you want to ask them is what is the aspect ratio or how many pixels wide?
But it makes it a bigger file, the higher the PPI is.
It's not the PPI. It's not the PPI that makes it higher. It's how many pixels are in the file.
So if they want 1800 at the longest dimension,
Right.
you just set it for that and the PPI does not matter.
no.
It doesn't matter unless they want you to make it 72, but don't change the 1800. Do you know what I mean? Like you would change what I just showed you, like make sure you're not changing the pixels. You're only changing the PPI. You'll have an 1800 pixels at 72 PPI. You can make that 1800 at 300 PPI also without changing the pixels. So the most important thing is how many pixels wide.
So if I send an image that's 1500 wide at 350, they may not look at my submission. If they wanted 72, is that
Well,
right?
it's fine.
No, they might, I mean, look, it depends on how much of a stickler they are, but you can easily change it without changing the 1500.
Right.
That's
So
the
72 is not a minimum, it's the exact number they want. It's not a
What you
minimum.
do is when you can batch, when you change the size, keep like the aspect ratio, like that it locks the aspect ratio. So it doesn't make it 1500 by 1500 and it's it's a long image and suddenly it's all stretched out. If you go 1500 and 1500 in the thing, it'll just, and keep the aspect ratio, lock the aspect ratio. It'll make the longest side, whatever the longest side is 1500. Now,
I
this
can
is
understand.
another thing.
72, as I said, is
Sometimes
not
they
a
want
minimum.
1500 wide, but sometimes they say 1500 at the widest dimension. That's not the same thing.
Right,
Right?
right. So 72 is an exact number, it's not a minimum. That's all I need to know.
We're gonna have to set up another session to talk about,
Yeah, sorry.
talk about Photoshop and
But thank you.
AI and everything.
I'm happy to do like a really much more technical
Yeah,
workup if you
yeah.
want.
Yeah,
Done
This
it
is great,
a lot, so
great.
We appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you, Patricia, for all your insight.
Feel free to email me and you will
Thank
get
you.
information. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
thank you.
Talk to you tomorrow, Patricia.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all.
When you will receive a link for the recording, you will let me know, right?
Yes, I will send it to you.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.